Now that Bandai Namco has revealed us some more content in regards to Little Nightmares 3, we will now be focusing on a short series that many of us have been rambling on, and we are now able to see, or rather listen, to a new story lore that offers us some hints that the world of Little Nightmares is more than what we have speculated before, with a special someone's voice uncovering a variety of secrets and connections on what the Little Nightmares world is truly about. Hello everyone, this is Little Nightheories here, ready to play with our childhood fears, and today's video we will be explaining and theorizing the story of the Little Nightmares 6-part podcast series, The Sounds of Nightmares. Before we begin, there will be many spoilers involving all Little Nightmares media, including The Sounds of Nightmares. So if you have not yet listened to all 6 episodes, I highly recommend you do so now, so that you won't have to miss out on any key information and entertainment. Playlists will be in the description down below. The story is set at a place that is called the Counties, where we are introduced to a young girl named Ruth, or who we know her as Noon, which put separately spells no one. She got this name from bullies at her school who often tease her and call her no one. And to make it a nicer moniker, she decides to address herself as Noon. Noon fell ill-ridden when she came in contact with a deadly waterborne parasite. The disease was close to ending Noon's life until she received a miracle cure from a doctor, eradicating the disease and curing her from her sickness, which made Noon become the center of attention on television, with the doctor parading his success, as if she was some sort of lab experiment or celebrity. Even the bullies seemed to change their ways towards her. However, even though this miracle cure did eliminate the parasite, it also caused Noon to have some strange side effects. She started experiencing very realistic nightmares, along with painful headaches, in which in her dreams, she is actually able to smell, taste, feel, and even sense pain, as if her dreams were a reality. Noon didn't feel total control over her body anymore. In fact, she still felt as if the parasite was still in her, tampering from the inside, despite the disease being disposed of. And because of this, her parents decided to assign her to a psychiatric institute, where she meets a counselor named Otto. From day one, Otto seems to be a nice man who is hoping to cure Noon from her headaches and traumatic memories. But as more therapy sessions commence, and Noon recalling more of her dreams to the counselor, Otto seems to be more fixated on Noon's dreams when he urges to use the poor girl for his own beneficial research. Because many years ago, as a young boy, Otto used to have his beloved sister named Cece, who had vanished away by a mysterious black figure that he calls the Ferryman. Noon has also encountered the Ferryman in her dreams, but she refers to him as the Candleman, due to his appearance looking like melted candle wax. And figuring out that Noon has discovered the Ferryman, Otto now sets himself on a new task to meet the Ferryman and get his sister back. And what better way to do so than to use Noon as his perfect candidate. As the young girl recalls her nightmares to the persistent counselor, she remembers being settled in a number of locations, with each of them embedded with their own monstrous beings. There was a prison, a bathhouse, a shopping mall, a carnival, a sewer system, and a factory. These are all of Noon's dreams in the nightmare world that she calls the Nowhere. Otto theorizes that Noon is not actually dreaming at all. Rather, she was entering an alternative dimension where she is not in the waking world, as Otto has witnessed Noon literally disappearing as she slept until she reappeared afterwards. And Otto, being persistent into reuniting with his long-lost sister, grows more threatening and not in the correct state of his mind, ignoring his true morals of a health-healing counselor and taking the line into tormenting Noon by pushing her more and more into her struggles and the Nowhere, as he plans to manipulate the girl in order to seek entry into the nightmare dimension. Otto becomes less of an enjoyable, if not a downright hated character throughout the rest of the episodes, and us listeners feel more sorry about poor little Noon. Her health is becoming much worse because of the despicable counselor. And to make matters worse, she recently found out that she has a tumor within her head that Otto has discovered and has been keeping it away from her for some time. This was the main cause of her headaches. However, whenever Noon is in the nowhere, she doesn't feel any pain of her headaches in the world, as if all of her illnesses have vanished just by being present in the world. In fact, she is more stronger in the nowhere than before when she was in the waking world counties, but is also influenced in a much darker and sinister demeanor from this terrifying world that she has ventured through. Everything has come to an end when both Otto and Noon attempt to travel through the nowhere by attaching a dream apparatus on Noon's head and using it to tune the frequency to the alternate dimension, opening a portal intertwined with both worlds. As Noon dreams into a deep sleep, she encounters the ferryman once again. And with this technology equipment, Otto is able to distinguish the ferryman's words as he and Noon both interact with each other, where we learn that Noon's real name is actually Ruth. The ferryman, speaking on his behalf, claims that he is trying to rescue Noon away from all the torment that she had to face in her life, promising to cure her from her tumor and illnesses, and to get away from the true monster this whole time, Otto, who has caused her so much pain because of his twisted experiments. Otto pleads with the ferryman to grant him entry into the nowhere and even tries to apply a dream apparatus onto himself, but the ferryman denies his request, and before he knew it, Noon is taken away by the ferryman and is transported to the nowhere, where she will remain there forever. Infuriated that he was not successful, Otto plans to seek another child to do more therapy sessions with and to torment in order to gain access to the nowhere. And he has already found his next victim, a young sleepwalking boy named Ethan, who he will be dreaming with Otto over and over again, just like with Noon. And this marks the end of the show. So after listening to the podcast, I tried to unravel a few things, such as where did the ferryman come from, or what happens to Noon afterwards. It was kind of confusing to put the whole meaning of the podcast in a metaphorical term, but I might have just figured it out. But first, we have to break down the theory, starting with the ferryman and the nowhere. Now, I won't be explaining too much about the nowhere because I already have a video for it. But what I will say is that the nowhere doesn't seem to be just an alternate dimension based on little children's fears. It could mean a whole lot more than that. But that will be in the Nowhere Explained video. The ferryman is the gatekeeper to the nowhere and seems to be the one observing children, since in the podcast, Noon describes the ferryman watching over her from afar until he disappears. She describes him to be a guardian to her, one who will protect her away from the horrors such as Otto, and promising to cure her away from her illnesses. The ferryman does have some sort of supernatural abilities, as he is able to make contact between the counties and the nowhere, and appear out of nowhere in random places. You see what I did there? Now, it does interest me that the ferryman is observing Noon from afar, as I wonder why he is watching her go through many obstacles in the nowhere. But then I thought of one thing. The ferryman must be an eye. Not a literal eye, but more metaphorically. I had this thought because the ferryman must be loyal to the nowhere. Well, what I believe anyways. But he must be loyal to the nowhere as he is the one transferring children to this world. And again, he is considered a guardian in Noon's perspective. And he also watches them from above or from afar, like an eye. The eye of the signal tower or the eye of the nowhere who are always watching. The ferryman must be a supposed parental guardian for children, albeit in a more twisted manner. And parents have to supervise their children so that they won't get hurt, do anything bad, or probably just to see what they would do. And I think that's what the ferryman might be doing. He is looking after Noon because he believes that she could survive in a world filled with monsters and distortion. And so he watches over her to see how she would escape situations like these for her own survival. and if possible, he would interfere if Noon is getting too close to being hurt or killed, by transporting her back into the waking world until she falls asleep again to return to the nowhere, in which Noon calls this the halfway point, which is a cloud of black mist that only happens whenever Noon falls asleep and wakes up in the nowhere. And after all, and I'm saying this too much, the ferryman serves as a quote-unquote guardian to children. This can be proven more in the Little Nightmares graphic novel book. Granted, the story is not canon, but it shows the ferryman helping the refugee boy escape the North Wind, who was close to taking the boy away. Again, and I'm sorry for saying this so much, he is the supposed guardian to the children in the nowhere. But if the ferryman is supposed to be a guardian, then why would he send children to a world full of monsters and distortion? That doesn't seem like what a guardian would do, right? Well, what if I told you that's not how a guardian works in the nowhere? Let's say, and this is a weird example, but let's say a mom or dad of yours would tell you that capturing maybe a grasshopper in a box and then killing it is not okay. Even though it's not a person and you have complete free will to do so, it still doesn't make it right. But in the nowhere, it's pretty much alright to do that. In fact, there's no one around you to tell you to do it or not. It's like the rules don't exactly work in the same way as it does in the waking world, or they don't exist at all. I do think rules do exist in the nowhere, but that'll be in the future videos. In the ferryman's perspective, the wrong he is doing by taking away children to a more hostile environment feels, looks, and moreover is the right deed instead of the other way around. He is acting out a role of a guardian, but it's not right. It's kind of like this perfect world that is made for children, especially that the ferryman wants everyone to live in. Or maybe just children. But I say everyone because he didn't say that Otto was not allowed to be in the nowhere, but the price of torment is not yet paid. Which means if Otto torments enough children to be considered a monster, then he would be able to enter the nowhere as a monster himself. This quote-unquote perfect world that is drawing the attention of children and possibly adults who have witnessed it as a young child feels like some sort of way to lure someone or people to grow popularity in the society of this world, where it is all about torment in different ways possible. This reminds me of a scene in Pinocchio, where some naughty children were picked up by this weird, shady-looking man who takes children to a place called Pleasure Island, or Mischievous Island, I don't really know, where there are no rules around and kids can pretty much cause havoc wherever and whenever they want and have fun being bad children, until they mysteriously turn into donkeys and sent to be part of some circus campaign, where they are treated like worthless animals and even made sure that they speak in donkey language so that their secret will never come out. I don't know the exact story of Pinocchio cause I haven't watched it in a very long time. I think this might be the same scenario for the ferryman here. He wants to lure children into this perfect world where kids can be free from their sicknesses and hardship, only to end up being trapped forever and forced to survive in this world full of monsters and distortion. Just like how the children from Pinocchio are forever trapped as donkeys and forced to be part of a circus play or whatever that's part of the story. Either if the ferryman sees this as a good deed, trying to save children from their tormentors in the waking world, or that he very much knows that this act is cynical but proceeds with it anyway. Either way, it is still unknown what his true motives are. But wait, what about Noon? What does her story mean? Well, I believe that Noon's story in the podcast could reflect on why children are in this twisted world in the first place and why they are sent here. During the podcast, we come to understand Noon's life struggles, most of them being very unpleasant to the point where she is experiencing the worst times of her life. She has been bullied a lot where she gets an everyday name. She almost died from a water parasite. She must have family issues considering she does not talk about her parents so much. She has been receiving bad headaches and traumatic memories. She has to endure a despicable counselor. and she recently found out that she has a tumor in her head that has been causing her headaches. At this moment, Noon is not happy with her life right now, and I don't know for sure, but I do think that Noon has also suffered when she was much younger, but that's just my assumption. So the ferryman, sensing Noon's sadness, decides to call out to her in her dreams, and possibly trying to present her to this perfect world that she could embark on, with different rules and no illnesses, but only one thing to do, and that is to just survive. Noon seems to be another easy victim to the nowhere, as she is drawn more into the darkness of the world, as it has some sort of power of manipulation, especially with the monsters. The nowhere seems to only accept children who are mistreated or suffering in their lives, basically being tormented in the waking world, and therefore it will turn them into monsters themselves. For instance, if you were to grow up in a poor home, then you are most likely to become poor as well. So therefore, if you were to grow up in a world full of monsters, then you would most likely become a monster yourself, as the nowhere is just one big nightmare realm, that basically anything can be possible, since it is all just a very realistic dream, or even more than that. Noon fell into a trap where she cannot handle all these bad things happening in her life anymore, where she felt weak and helpless, and you could say that she'd rather be in the nowhere because she's much stronger and maybe more fierce than how she was in the waking world before. So she took the ferryman's hand in hopes to be in a new and better world, but it was very unknown to her that she was putting herself in a much dire situation at first. But Noon didn't also naively fell into this trap. She was already getting under the influence of the nowhere's darkness and twisted demeanor, which can also be one of the reasons why she went with the ferryman in the first place. Noon wants to find a perfect world where she doesn't have to suffer so much anymore, and where she can become a bigger person where no one, ironically, could try to hurt her. And to do that, she has to become a monster. Either a big monster or a small one. She would become a monster with darkness, because that would be her best defense mechanism to not be bullied by anyone anymore. And like I said with the ferryman, he believes that doing the bad is actually the good. And with Noon influenced by darkness, I think she is slowly starting to see the same point of view like the ferryman's. Now, I know I'm digging really deep into this rabbit hole, and some things I'm saying might not make so much sense, and even I can believe that. But think about it. It's just like how us as human beings feel. Our society is boring and cruel and monotonous. Some of us hate it because we're basically a terrible species on this world, and I have to admit myself that humans are neither superior nor inferior. But I do strongly believe that we are mostly a bad species, and we want to escape from this reality and into a world where it satisfies us more and it fits our interest. So we use our technology devices to escape into a world that doesn't exist, but it helps us forget what the real world is like. And this sort of metaphor is used for the viewers from Little Nightmares 2, but this can also be used again for the sounds of nightmares. Now, one thing I find interesting is that Otto seems to know something about Noon's dreams, but not entirely. And what I mean by that is when he remembers the ferryman who took away Cece long ago. Let me explain. So Otto knows something about the ferryman, but he doesn't know exactly who he is, which is why he is so adamant to find out who this mysterious being is, as he is the one who took his sister away to somewhere. And he suspects that somewhere might be a different world. He doesn't straight up know anything about the nowhere. He doesn't know that it was a world at all. But he has the idea that Cece was taken to somewhere where she might not be in the waking world anymore. Considering the fact when Otto was watching Noon as she slept, and when Noon was taken away, she vanished into thin air. So therefore, Cece must have vanished into thin air as well. The fact that after the first episode, we can already sense another side of Otto, because in chapter 2, Otto presents Noon to a device that he calls a dream apparatus, which what I can speculate is a technology equipment that allows you to control your dreams more. It's kind of like lucid dreaming, but more of the opposite of its purpose. Lucid dreaming is to reduce anxiety or trauma. This dream apparatus only increases it, looking more into your nightmares and vice versa. But how did Otto figure out that dreams could be involved into finding Cece? Well, simply put, he must have had dreams as well. Ever since his sister has vanished, he must have had nightmares where he was able to see her somehow, and figures out that his dreams, or dreams in general, must be a key feature into where Cece might be. Somewhere in his mind, or anyone else's mind for that matter. And I think that Otto made this dream apparatus specifically for Noon. Not exactly for Noon, like he has known her for a long time, but for someone like her, who has experienced the nowhere and disappeared from the waking world, a candidate who he was looking for. I believe that after Cece was taken away, Otto vows to bring her back by trying to get answers about the ferryman, but he was unsuccessful and possibly still holds on to that goal even as he grows up into being a counselor. Which makes me believe that the reason why Otto became a counselor is to try and use children to find a way to look for Cece, but he needs to find that perfect candidate who has dreams similar to his, who has been through the nowhere, and who has mysteriously vanished and met the ferryman. He has fallen into a goal that he's so persistent in that he's willing to hurt others to complete it, which drove him into madness considering that over time, he has become less caring and more threatening. Otto losing Cece was the start of him becoming a monster who is tormenting children to rescue someone important to him, where he loses his marbles as he stated in the podcast. And after learning a lot about the nowhere from Noon, he now is seeking for another child to torment. Otto has been waiting for this moment for years, and has never forgotten his goal ever since he was a young boy. Now, this is just my speculation, but he must have been driven into this way out of guilt for not helping his sister, or probably because many people blamed him for Cece's disappearance. And now that he has found the moment to finally get answers about where his sister might be, he is letting his inner demons out. Now, before we wrap up on this video, I just want to conclude on the Sounds of Nightmares. Now, the burning question is, does it have a direct meaning such as a theme or metaphor? Well, quite frankly, no, it doesn't. At least not fully. I could be completely wrong on this, but I don't think the podcast has a direct metaphorical meaning or theme, but rather just to expand the lore of Little Nightmares, and to show that it is actually a separate universe this whole time. In Little Nightmares 1, the theme was hunger, a form of greed. Little Nightmares 2, the theme was escapism, escaping into a new world. The Secrets of the Maw DLC, that one has no theme, but it still ties into the lore, as well as Very Little Nightmares. It's hard to find a direct theme of the podcast because there might not be one. I think its sole purpose is to be connected more into the nowhere, share new stories and characters, reveal more of the entire lore, and more nightmares we will have to face soon. But it goes without saying that as long as you have evidence to support your theory, then it is indeed valid. So that is my theory video on the Sounds of Nightmares. This video took me a long time to make as I was sick on the first week and then I was stuck over time until I came to my senses now. It's just a whole mess to me. I just want to address right away that these are just theories and I can't say if any of them are true because many people keep misinterpreting the fact that they are just my speculations. And I might have missed some key information during the process, so if you guys can, please let me know down in the comment section below and I will consider the Sounds of Nightmares Part 2 theory video. So that is it. Thank you guys for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It would mean a whole lot to me. You can also follow me on Instagram or X, link will be in the description down below. And be sure to check out my fanfiction series, My Little Nightmares Stories of the Little Ones. Link will be down in the description box below. But until then, I'll see you little ones next time. Bye bye.